Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Black Ghost of the Blue Mountains. If you ever head through Victoria Pass on Australia's Great Western Highway, keep an eye out at night. For more than a century now, truckers have reported seeing the ghost of a child bride called Carolyn Collette. She was by her ex-boyfriend John Walsh in 1842 out there in the pass. Now they say her tortured soul haunts those who pass by on a dark, cold night. It's claimed that the colder the night, the better. When black ice covers the road, threatening to spin vehicles down to their doom, everyone is forced to slow down. Once everyone is slow, Caroline is said to approach, ready to seek vengeance for her gruesome death. Next up at number 9 now, we have the Burning Airman. During World War II, an Australian bomber plane crashed on the outskirts of Canberra, killing all 4 on board. It would become known as the Canberra air disaster. Years later, people in the area started reporting strange encounters in the woods. They said unearthly lights could be seen near the old crash site. Others heard the droning noise of a plane followed by a loud bang. Then things got weirder. A teenage girl once ran screaming from the forest, saying that she was being followed by a long dead airman. She said he was covered in fire and that he followed her to the edge of the forest. More people began to report the same thing, horrific encounters that left people traumatized. The stories have been enough to turn some people away from the forest forever for fear of seeing this burning airman stalking them through the trees. Moving on to number 8 now, we have Kelly. This is a very creepy one that was shared on Reddit. User Puppy2010 said that they have relatives in the northern beaches area of Australia on the country's east coast. There, locals tell tales of a girl called Kelly who would appear in people's cars near Oxford Falls if they were travelling alone past midnight. She is said to be the spirit of a girl who died in a car crash there in the 1970s and has haunted the road ever since. For me though, the scariest part of the story is that if you don't tell Kelly to get out of the car, she will take control of the car. For those who believe in the tale of Kelly, they worry for the travellers who have never heard this story before and don't know to tell her to get out of the car. Next up at number 7 now, we have the Orchard Hills Mafia house. This is a huge white mansion found out in Greater Sydney. You might say it was quite beautiful if not for the scary stories attached to it. For some ghost hunters, no place in Sydney has more spirits than the Orchard Hills Mafia house. Lights are said to just flash off and on even when the building is empty. From the outside, people have seen creepy shadows flickering behind the curtains. Some people even claim that these shadows come outside and approach visitors, chasing them down the driveway with demonic grins on their faces. Why are there so many spirits said to live there? Well, that goes back to the building's name. It's called the Mafia House because it was said to be owned by members of a local mafia group. They were rumoured to routinely execute informants and snitches in one of the upstairs rooms. Between the murderous gangs and the spirits of their victims, many people choose to stay well clear of the big white mansion. Coming in at number 6 now, we have the Hawkesbury River Monster. In a lot of these urban legends videos, we've discussed creatures that bear a strange resemblance to the Loch Ness Monster. Well, perhaps this is Australia's version. The Hawkesbury River Monster is said to be a snake-like creature with a long neck, a large body and 2 sets of flippers with an eel-like tail. Locals tell fearsome tales of the beast and claim that they have proof to back it up. People point to the huge slide marks that keep appearing on the riverbanks or the crushed and abandoned boats with no owners in sight. Some say this is not a modern phenomena either and that the monster is depicted in the ancient Aboriginal art of that area. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the Hands of Goodna Cemetery. Located on the outskirts of Brisbane, Goodna Cemetery doesn't look to be out of the ordinary at first. Those who visit it though do so because they have heard the stories of what goes on there after dark. According to local legend, there is some sort of force in the cemetery. People describe it differently, but one thing they all agree on is that this force does not like visitors. At night, people feel invisible hands punching and scratching them. It's not just a light tap either. People say you'd know if the hands touch you. One particularly scary story involves a local man who once tried to flee the cemetery in his car, but the car just wouldn't start. He spent the night huddled in his car trying to ignore the strange noises outside. The next morning, he stepped out and found long scratch marks all the way down the side of his car. something had been trying to get in and get him. Moving on to number 4 now, we have Schneiders Alley. In the early 20th century, Dr. Schneider lived in Clifton Manor with his wife and child. Their lives were quite uneventful until one day when tragedy struck. Both the doctor's wife and child died in an accident. The doctor spiraled into madness. At first, it was just his personal life that was affected, but then it began to bleed into his work. He would take his patients to a little log cabin near his house where he performed surgical experiments on them without anesthetic. The house saw him mutilate countless people. The locals say that in the years since then, they've seen his disfigured patients wandering the hills around the house and lurking in the alley. At night, distant screams can be heard from those still reliving their operations. Some brave soul visit the house to try and catch their sounds. Next up at number 3 now, we have the Satanist Cult. The King's Park in Perth draws in many visitors during the day, but at night it plays host to all kinds of spooky legends. One of this is the Satanic Cult. It's said that on certain nights a secret group of devil worshippers descend upon the park where they perform strange rituals. Occult symbols are drawn, effigies are burnt, and all kinds of demonic behaviour takes place upon the grassy slopes there. Some even say that human sacrifices happen there. This legend has only been fueled by the reports of local homeless men going missing after they visit the park. People believe that sleeping in the park after dark is inviting yourself to be killed in the name of the demons that the cult worships. Next up at number 2 now, we have the Markery Field Station. In the southwest suburb of Sydney lies a train station with a grisly secret. When the last train leaves Markery Field Station and the platform is totally empty, a faint cry can be heard in the breeze. Believers say the station is haunted. For those that find the crying scary to hear, things only get worse. Some say the crying eventually stops, and then, after a short pause, it turns to blood-curdling screams of anguish. On some occasions, people even see the ghost itself, a teenage girl roaming the platform with dark blood covering her face. She cries and cries, then screams and screams. For me though, the creepiest part is that sometimes she stares right at you. And finally, number 1 now, we have the Min Min Lights. Those who have ventured to Eastern Australia's outback will often return with tales of the Min Min Lights. On some nights, burning lights are said to appear in the distance but never get closer. They keep pace alongside the car but never get any nearer, almost as if it was watching you. Some people believe that if you leave your car, the lights will stalk you through the Australian outback. But hey, don't take my word for it. Unlike many of the other ones we've talked about on our list, there has been documented cases of the Min Min Lights. You can find footage on YouTube filmed by locals. In 2003, a report suggested that the lights are just a trick of the light and appear under certain conditions. Others believe this only deepens the conspiracy. They say the government is trying to shake people off the trail and not discover the true nature of the Min Min Lights. Starting off at number 10 now, we have A Devil Among Us. This is a very famous story coming from Sydney, and one that many locals know about, even if they wish they didn't. On June 9th, 1979, the Godson family were waiting at the Circular Quay for a ferry to take them out to Sydney's Luna Park. Out of nowhere, they were approached by a satanic looking figure wearing a loincloth, mask and horned headdress. This being posed for a photo with 6-year-old Damien of the family. Tragically, it will be the last picture ever of the boy. Later that night, while they were at Luna Park, a fire broke out on the ghost train ride, killing the entire Godson family. Now, during the investigation, police found this picture and wanted to ask the horned man some questions. However, nobody knew who he was or where to find him, and he was never seen again. This left room for a legend to grow, that the devil himself was walking on the streets of Sydney that day, bringing death to whoever he touches, and always dressed in costume so that his horns don't look out of place. Next up at number 9 now, we have Bodies in the Bridge. Sydney Harbour Bridge was completed in 1932, but it didn't come without a price, it seems. Records show that 16 people died during its construction, but there were also 3 that were supposedly covered up. Legend says that those 3 workers fell from the bridge and their disappearance wasn't even noticed because they were temporary workers on the site. Their bodies fell into the pylons of the bridge. The bosses deemed the bodies too difficult to retrieve, and so they continued to build the bridge around their bodies. This urban legend has persisted in Sydney in the decades since, with many people swearing that it's true. They say it's the reason the bridge is actually haunted, and also that they try to not cross the bridge for fear of the workers' spirits rising up and taking their revenge on the living. Moving on to number 8 now, we have the Crown Casino Morgue. This one is really strange. The Crown Casino is one of the most famous ones in Melbourne. Looking at pictures, you would think it was just a luxurious party hub with no creepy stories attached to it. Me too, that's what I thought, but you are wrong. You see, for many years now, people have been convinced that below the casino, full of gamblers and partiers, there is a morgue for storing human bodies. They say the last stall in every bathroom there is always occupied because it's not actually a bathroom stall. Apparently there are actually exits that lead to secret hallways which lead to a huge morgue underneath the casino. Legend says that the staff use this system to discreetly move victims who have ended their lives due to heavy gambling losses. This grisly system is supposed to stop other gamblers from seeing the bodies and being put off the casino. I personally find casinos quite creepy and depressing places, but really, an underground morgue? What do you guys think? Maybe people doubting it really is the perfect cover. At number 7 now, we have the Westfall UFO. Most countries have their UFO stories. This one might be Australia's most famous. It happened on April 6th, 1966. Yes, that is 3 sixes. At 11 AM for about 20 minutes, more than 200 students and teachers claim they saw a UFO descend into a grass field known as the Grange. Some students described it as a grey saucer-shaped craft with a slight purple hue. It was about twice the size of a family car. Others described it differently and said it was more silvery green in colour. Some even said that as it sped away, the craft was chased by 5 unidentified aircraft which circled the object. In the 50 years since then, many of the witnesses have kept in touch and reaffirmed what they all saw with each other, despite their own friends and even family not believing them. At the time, a local TV station called Channel 9 said they had footage of the incident, but when they went to go and find the film canister in the archives, it was mysteriously empty. Now, witnesses believe there has been a cover-up. It's not uncommon for 1 or 2 people to see something and be mistaken, but with 200 people all seeing the same event, this story even has skeptics around the world interested. Moving on to number 6 now, we have the Burning Airman. If you head to Canberra in Australia, many locals are familiar with the story of the Burning Airman. Back in 1940, a Lockheed Hudson II bomber spiraled out of control and crashed into the forest near Canberra. There were 6 crew members on board. Sadly, none of them survived the crash. That would have been the end of it, but then, a few years later, locals reported seeing strange happenings near the crash site. Many people claimed to have seen unearthly lights in the sky. Sometimes they'd also hear the sound of a plane getting closer to the ground, but when they went out to go and check, there was nothing there. Then they saw the Burning Man. The first sighting of this strange being was by a local teenage girl. One night the girl ran screaming from the forest. She said she was being followed by an airman who was covered in flames. The being followed her to the edge of the forest, but for some reason it could walk no further and disappeared off into the night. Since then, a number of people have reported seeing the Burning Man walking towards them in the woods. Does it have evil intentions? Is he simply a lost spirit trying to move on to the afterlife? His scary appearance may mean nobody will ever get close enough to find out. Moving on to number 4 now, we have Fisher's Ghost. Some say this is actually Australia's most famous ghost story. In June 1842, an ex-convict named Frederick Fisher vanished from his farm in Campbelltown, west of Sydney. It was a mystery. The police could find no trace of him. The house lay empty for a while, and then one day another ex-convict arrived at the house. His name was George Worrell. He claimed that Fisher had returned to England and had left the farm to him in a letter. 4 months later, a friend of Fisher's named John Farley burst into the local hotel in the town and cried out that he had just seen Fisher's ghost sitting by the river. He said that he tried to get closer to the ghost, but his horse reared back and wouldn't go any further. He said the ghost was trying to draw his attention to something near the river. A search party went out there and found Fisher's remains buried in a shallow grave near the edge of the river where the ghost had been pointing. Suspicion turned towards Worrell, who was living in Fisher's house. They arrested him, whereupon he confessed to the murder of Fisher. He was tried and then hanged for his crime. Ever since then, Campbelltown annually celebrates the festival of Fisher's Ghost, where they remember the tale of a spirit that helped solve its own murder. Moving on to number 3 now, we have Pictons Ghost Town. This is a town about 80 kilometers southwest of Sydney that has earned quite the reputation for its links with the supernatural. It's home to the famous Red Bank Range Railway Tunnel. It's steeped in history. It was used to store mustard gas tanks during World War II and was even a mushroom farm at one point, but that's not why we are visiting it today. In 1916, a local girl called Emily Bollard was walking through the tunnel late at night when she was hit by a train and killed. Some say Others say it was just a tragic accident, but ever since then things haven't been the same. In the century since, locals have reported seeing a white figure floating in the tunnel. She has no face. There's also been reports of lights floating above people's heads, sudden drops in temperature, black shadows darting around, and even ghostly children appearing and laughing. They say Emily is more likely to appear if there is a psychic or clairvoyant around, but she has been known to appear to the average person, especially if they visit alone and at night. At number 2 now, we have the glowing cross of Lismor. For this one, we're going way back to 1907 to the town of Lismor in New South Wales. 29-year-old railway worker William Steenson was on duty when he tried to stop a runaway train with his bare hands. He was run over and killed. William was buried in a cemetery and his family erected a crucifix of granite above his grave. That would have been the end of the story, but then 11 years later something strange began to happen with the granite cross. It began to glow. One by one the whole town came to see this. William Steenson's cross had a brilliant white hue coming from every inch of it. They began to call it the ghost of the hill. Over the next 60 years, news of this glowing cross began to spread more across Australia. Reporters, investigators and tourists poured in to see the glowing cross. Some of them said it could be radioactive, others said it was just a reflection. Nobody was ever going to figure it out though, because in 1986 the cross disappeared. Some say it was a theft by robbers who wanted this famous object for themselves. Others thought it was a cover-up to just hide the paranormal. Either way, the cross was replaced with a replica which never glowed at all. That was over 30 years ago, but the legend of the glowing cross is still talked about to this day. And finally at number 1 now we have the Guyra Dam Mystery. On the 8th of December 1999, an unidentified object crashed into the small town of Guyra. It completely flattened an area about 52 by 20 feet across and then plunged into the water. By the time anyone could get to the site, the object had already sunk beneath the mud. Immediately, rumours started spreading. Some said it was a UFO, space junk, a meteorite, a NASA craft returning from Mars, frozen sewage, or perhaps just a hoax. Either way, something needed to be done. The object had crashed into the town's water supply, so they cut it off to stop potential contamination. Police divers recovered material from below the mud. Geologists said it was just a meteorite, and none of the wild theories were true that people had come up with. However, those same people were not happy with the official explanation. They point to all the witness reports of a large object and a mysterious 120-foot gouge in the reed beds. They also say the burn marks left in the area are not normally associated with meteorite impacts. To put it simply, they believe there was a cover-up of a real UFO crash landing in this little Australian town. And now the stories are all people have to go on. Starting off number 10 now, we have the NULLARBOR nymph. The NULLARBOR plain is a vast semi-arid plain in South Australia. Its harsh climate and terrain has left it mostly uninhabited. Some say that there is one person who definitely lives in that land though, the NULLARBOR nymph. She is said to be a semi-naked woman who lives among the kangaroos there. The first sighting of her was on December 26, 1971. A group of professional kangaroo shooters reported seeing the half-naked woman among several kangaroos from Western Australia in Eucla, near South Australia's border. They captured this picture that matches their description of a white blonde woman wearing kangaroo skins and grabbing a kangaroo by its tail. In the years since then, more and more people have reported seeing her. The following year, the shooters said that this was all just a hoax, but others say that's just a cover-up and that the NULLARBOR nymph is still out there on the plains, perhaps one of many, just grabbing kangaroo tails. Strange. Moving on to number 9 now, we have the Devil's Pool. That's the ominous name of this pool of water near the town of Babinda in Queensland, Australia. Some people trek through the rainforest there to see this picturesque view of the Babinda boulders and the Devil's Pool below them. Others go there to investigate the gruesome history behind its name. It's been feared by Aboriginal people there for centuries. One of their stories says that there was once a young beautiful woman in the local tribe named Ulana. Ulana married a tribal elder named Warunu. It didn't last long. Ulana met a handsome younger man from another tribe and ran away with him. Warunu sent out search parties to bring them back. They caught up to the couple at Babinda Boulders, right next to the pool of water. Faced with death or a forced marriage, Ulana chose death. She flung herself into the torrid water below. Nobody saw her surface again, and they say that Ulana never really left the water, that her soul still inhabits the water, drawing men in leading to their deaths. This legend would have remained relatively unknown if it weren't for one thing. Since 1959, at least 17 people have drowned at the pool under strange circumstances. Some say it's just the dangerous water flow, others point to the origin story of the Devil's Pool. Next up at number 8 now we have Sarah's house. This is the story of a woman called Sarah Marshall. No, not that one. This is a different one. This one was a British convict who was shipped out to Australia to serve times for her crime in the 19th century. Once she had her freedom back, she began to live a normal life. She met a man called John Simpson and the couple had 8 children together. One night though, Sarah was on her way home in Castlereagh, New South Wales. A group of men stalked and attacked her, brutally murdering Sarah before leaving her remains near her house. Ever since that day, locals have said that Sarah haunts the town graveyard, seeking revenge on the living. People report seeing a white figure drifting around the cemetery, and others have heard footsteps that aren't their own. Some have told experiences of their cars not turning on or off. That can be extra creepy if you're trying to leave and Sarah just won't let you. No thanks. Moving on to number 7 now, we have the Adelaide Arcade. I like how that one rolls off the tongue. Adelaide Arcade. That's where the fun ends though for now, because this is apparently Australia's oldest shopping arcade and people say it's haunted. The legend goes that in 1887 the caretaker of this arcade, Frank Clooney, was investigating a flickering light when he fell into an electrical generator and was mangled to death. The father of 5's body wasn't found till some time later. It didn't take long for people to start saying that they felt his presence in the arcade, walking among them, quietly watching them. Over the years, people have got quite used to his footsteps around the place. I'm glad they're comfortable being haunted on a daily basis. I wouldn't even like an annual haunting. Is that a thing? Moving on to number 6 now, we have the mythical Panther. In the last video I talked about the ghost of the Blue Mountains near Sydney. Well, it seems like there may also be another scary being there. For many years, farmers, wildlife rangers, residents and conspiracy theorists alike have believed in the existence of a black panther living in the Blue Mountains. They say it feeds on livestock and wallabies, and they provided photos of scratchings on trees, scat samples, hair and paw prints as proof of the beast's existence. For many years though, the claims were dismissed. Then, in May 2018, this picture was posted to a Facebook group that claimed to prove once and for all that a panther really is real. However, before it could enter the realm of facts, some people said that a picture had cropped up before when people tried to claim there was a panther over in Victoria, a whole other different place. This plunged the panther back into the land of myths and urban legends, still prowling in the dark. Coming at number 5 now, we have the Wakenhurst Parkway. This is a road north of Sydney that has gained a real reputation for the paranormal. In 2014, a documentary crew went there to make a show called The Parkway Hauntings. They aimed to take believers and skeptics alike to the reserve along the road with a spiritual medium to investigate reports of paranormal activity in the area. Things went disastrously wrong though, when not long into filming, believers and skeptics started falling ill and vomiting. Some sensed presences around them, and others refused to ever return to that site again. The filmmaker Bianca Biassi said that she had to return to do some more shots, but that she wasn't looking forward to it. There have been countless stories online of a girl in a white dress that appears on the Middle Creek Bridge there. Perhaps even more scary though are the stories of a nun apparition that just sits in the backseat of cars. As far as I'm aware, that documentary did get made in the end, so if you're interested to know more about this, go and check out the Parkway Hauntings. Next up at number 4 now, we have Jack the Ripper's resting place. For many years now, there has been an urban legend that the famous British serial killer Jack the Ripper may have escaped the UK and lived out his life in Australia. They say he was actually a man named Frederick Bailey Deeming, who sailed off to Australia after he gruesomely murdered his wife and children and buried them under his kitchen floor. He was a gas fitter by trade who began hunting his next victim not long after the murders took place. He continued his killing spree in Melbourne before disappearing into the Australian wilderness. Eventually he was caught by the authorities and hanged. His story gave birth to the myth that because of the similarities between the cases, Jack the Ripper was actually Frederick Deeming. There is also the fact that Jack the Ripper's murders stopped right around the time that Deeming left Britain. is that a coincidence? Or do you think this urban myth is onto something? Moving on to number 2 now, we have the Razor. This is a short tale that many Australians will be familiar with. For many years, Magic Mountain was a water park in Adelaide that was extremely popular. During the scorching Australian summers, thousands would flock there to ride the slides and enjoy the many attractions, including mini golf, bumper boats, dodgems, and even a video game arcade. The park was relatively normal by any standards, and it served as a popular hangout for locals. Then, in the 1980s, a rumour began to spread. People said that one night, a group of men broke into the park and attached razor blades to the slides that the children used. Legend says that despite staff trying to remove every single one of these razor blades from the slides the next day, one of them still remained. It injured a child, apparently. Nobody knows how badly, not much more was ever said about it. The park has been closed since 2004, but the legend of the razors is still talked about to this day. And finally, number 1 now, we have the GOSFORD glyphs. This is the story of hieroglyphs found at Carryong on the Central Coast. The carvings caused quite the stir in the conspiracy theory community. The 300 engravings were found on 2 sandstone walls in the 1970s. Some say they were carved thousands of years ago by ancient Egyptian sailors. They depict boats, animals, stick men, and 2 are said to be the name of kings, one of them being Khufu. If the carvings were proven to be genuine, it would produce some big questions about how exactly these ancient Egyptians managed to travel some 9,000 miles across ocean and land to a continent that wasn't even known by people in the old world back then. Proof of their genuine nature would also be a big deal for those who believe that ancient civilizations were far more advanced than we're being led to believe. Academics and experts have dismissed the carvings as fake though, and I'd have to agree with them.